The first light of dawn spilled over the red mesas, painting the valley in hues of fire and dust. The air was still until the thunder of hooves broke it apart. 200 Apache warriors surrounded the small wooden cabin. Their horses snorted clouds of steam into the cold air. Their spears and bows caught the sunrise like blades of flame. At the center of that living storm stood a man alone. Royce Barrett had lived here for 3 years. 3 long years of silence, dirt, and waiting for ghosts that never came. He had learned to sleep with one eye open, to track the wind, to talk to the desert itself. But today, the desert had brought him something else, judgment. He stood at the cabin door unarmed. His rifle lay inside, forgotten. There was no point in reaching for it. Against 200 warriors, defiance would only make his death faster. Then he saw her. Amid the line of riders, a figure sat tall on a black horse, a young woman with braided hair, her face marked by the faint ashes of war paint. Her eyes locked onto his, and time broke. He knew that face. For months ago, he had found her half-conscious in the canyon, surrounded by wolves. He had carried her to safety, tended her wounds, and when dawn came, she vanished, leaving only a silver necklace on the ground. Now she was here, and the necklace gleamed against her throat once more. The warriors shouted, circling closer. From the ranks rode an older man, his features carved from stone, his presence unshakable. The chief. He raised his hand, and silence fell like a blade. "You stand on sacred ground," the chief said, his voice echoing across the dust. "You take what is not yours. You build your walls where our ancestors rest." Royce didn't answer. His throat was dry, his heart beat loud. Behind the chief, the woman, Fiona, looked at him again. Just for a moment, and the message was clear. Say nothing. He nodded ever so slightly. The chief gestured. Spears were lifted, and in that split second, Royce realized the cruel irony of fate, that the only soul who might save him was now sworn to destroy him. The desert held its breath, and the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the man who stood alone against 200 hearts of vengeance. The circle around the cabin held firm as the first full light of morning struck the valley. The air shimmered with heat and dust, and every heartbeat felt like a drum before execution. Royce didn't flinch. He stood tall, his hands open, palms turned outward, the gesture of surrender, or maybe of defiance. The chief dismounted. His boots hit the ground with the sound of final judgment. He approached slowly, eyes sharp as obsidian. "You've been here 3 winters," he said in a calm, measured tone. 3 years of cutting our trees, drinking our water, and hunting our lands. Did you think the wind would not tell us?" Royce's voice came low and steady. "I built where no one lived. The soil was empty." A murmur rippled through the warriors. The chief's brow furrowed. "Empty? There is no empty land. Every stone has a name. Every stream carries the memory of those who bled for it." Royce wanted to argue, to say that he meant no harm. But then his eyes found Fiona again. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. "Don't speak," the chief continued. "We found your traps near the sacred ridge. You claim ignorance, but the spirits do not forgive trespass." Royce drew a slow breath. "Then I'll make it right. Whatever I took, I'll return." A harsh laugh came from the crowd. One of the younger warriors stepped forward, bow drawn. "Return what cannot be touched. Return the silence you broke." Before the chief could respond, Fiona spoke, her voice clear, firm. "Let me question him, father." The chief turned sharply. "No, you will not." But she dismounted anyway. The warriors stepped aside, uncertain. Her presence carried both authority and rebellion, a storm contained within calm. Fiona stopped a few paces from Royce. "You built your home here alone. No tribe, no allies. Why?" Royce hesitated. He wanted to tell her the truth, that he came here to disappear, to escape the world that had long since lost its soul. But instead he said, "Because I wanted peace." "Peace," she repeated softly, almost to herself. "Then why does war follow you?" Before he could answer, A sound cut through the silence. Distant gunfire, faint but sharp. The warriors turned their heads. Horses stirred. The chief's expression hardened. They're near. Kiona's eyes widened. The white men. The chief nodded. The land takers. And for the first time, Royce saw fear, not for himself, but for them. Dust rose on the horizon, riders approaching fast, their silhouettes gleaming with rifles. The chief gave a sharp command. Warriors scattered to defensive positions. Kiona mounted her horse again, glancing down at Royce. "Stay alive," she whispered, "and maybe they'll listen to you later." The thunder of hooves grew louder. The desert was no longer silent. War was coming. The first shot cracked the stillness like lightning. A puff of smoke rose from the ridge, then another. The white riders burst into view, their rifles flashing in the morning sun. "Take cover," shouted one of the Apache warriors. The air exploded with the sound of gunfire. Royce dove behind a fallen beam as splinters tore through the walls of his cabin. Bullets hissed like angry hornets, kicking up dust and dirt. He grabbed his old Winchester from the porch, the same rifle he'd refused to touch moments ago. His hands trembled, but his eyes were steady. This time, he wasn't defending just himself. The chief barked orders in Apache, his warriors moving like shadows, spreading across the dunes with practiced precision. Arrows flew silent and deadly. A white rider fell from his horse. Another cried out, clutching his shoulder. Kiona rode past the cabin, hair whipping in the wind, bow drawn. She moved like fire, swift and fearless. Royce felt a surge of adrenaline. Without thinking, he ran toward her side, firing at the approaching riders. Behind the rocks, she shouted. They ducked together, bullets tearing through the sand above them. "You shouldn't be here," Royce yelled. She smirked, breathless. "Neither should you." They exchanged a glance, brief but electric, before both turned to fire again. The white riders pushed forward, shouting commands in English. "Get those papers. Don't let them burn it all." Royce froze. The land deeds. That's what they were after. The documents proving ownership, lies written on stolen ground. He sprinted back toward his cabin as bullets whizzed past. Inside, smoke and dust choked the air. The papers were in a tin box beneath the floorboards. He tore it open, grabbed the deeds, and stuffed them under his coat. A shadow fell across the doorway. One of the riders had followed him in. Royce swung the butt of his rifle, cracking the man across the jaw. The rider stumbled back, dropping his revolver. Royce fired once. The man collapsed. Outside, chaos reached. Flames licked the walls of the cabin. The desert wind turned the fire into a storm of sparks. Royce burst out into the open, clutching the papers. Kiona saw him and galloped forward. He threw the documents to her, shouting, "Keep them safe." She caught them just as an explosion rocked the valley. A powder keg ignited near the horses. Smoke swallowed everything in a rolling wave. When the dust settled, the remaining white riders were retreating. The chief raised his hand, signaling the warriors to cease pursuit. The battle was over. Royce stood in the ruins of his cabin, chest heaving, sweat and soot streaking his face. Round him, the warriors watched in silence. The chief approached slowly. "You fought for us," he said. "Why?" Royce looked at Kiona, the papers still clutched in her hand, her eyes burning with quiet strength. He exhaled. "Because your land was worth more than mine ever was." The sun had long fallen beyond the red cliffs when the drums began. Their deep rhythm echoed across the valley, slow, deliberate, and heavy with judgment. Royce stood in the center of the fire's circle, surrounded by warriors whose faces flickered in the firelight. The smell of smoke and sweat filled the air. He could feel the weight of every gaze upon him. His hands, bound in front of him, were raw from rope burns. The battle had ended, but his trial had just begun. The chief, Dishoba, stood before him, tall and composed, a carved staff in his hand. Beside him sat the council, 5 elders whose eyes seemed to pierce through the dark. "You fought with us," the chief began, his voice calm but distant. "But the question remains, why did you come here in the first place?" Royce hesitated. His throat felt dry as dust. I came to live quietly, he said, to build something with my own hands. The land seemed empty. A murmur rippled through the circle, a sound of quiet disapproval. Neshoba raised his hand for silence. Empty to you, but not to us. Royce lowered his gaze. I know that now. From the shadows, one of the elders spoke, his voice sharp like flint. You took land that belonged to our ancestors. You built your cabin over our sacred ground. Royce's chest tightened. I didn't know. Another elder leaned forward. The white men always say that. The tension was thick. Then, a sudden voice cut through the murmurs. Calm, clear, but filled with emotion. It was Kiona. She stepped into the circle, her chin high, her eyes unwavering. He didn't steal, she said. He fought for us. He saved the deeds the invaders tried to take. Without him, they would have claimed this land by sunrise. A silence followed, one heavy enough to stop even the drums. One of the elders frowned. You speak out of turn, daughter of Neshoba. I speak for truth, Kiona answered firmly. He could have fled, but he stayed. He fought beside us. That must mean something. Neshoba's expression didn't change, but his eyes flicked between his daughter and Royce, as if weighing a truth that couldn't be spoken aloud. Royce felt a strange mixture of shame and gratitude. He wanted to speak, but words failed him. The fire cracked, sending a shower of sparks into the night. Finally, Neshoba turned to the elders. Tomorrow, he said, we decide if this man remains or leaves our lands forever. The drums resumed, slower now, heavier. Two warriors took Royce by the arms and led him away. Kiona watched him go, her expression unreadable. But before he disappeared into the darkness, he heard her whisper, so quiet that only he could hear it. Don't give up. Not yet. Royce nodded faintly as they led him toward the shadows. For the first time, the frontier no longer felt empty. It felt like something worth fighting for, even if it cost him everything. The night was cold and silent. The fire in the center of camp had burned low, its last embers glowing like dying stars. Royce sat alone in a small pen made of wooden stakes, not bound, but not free. Above him, the desert sky stretched endless and merciless. He could still hear the distant drums echoing through the canyons, a heartbeat of the land itself. Tomorrow, at first light, the council would decide his fate. Some wanted him banished, others executed. He tried to rest, but every creak of the night made his pulse quicken. Coyotes cried in the distance. The smell of sage and ash lingered. He had faced bullets and fire before, but never this, the quiet fear of not belonging anywhere. A soft sound stirred the silence, the faint rustle of leather and sand. Royce turned his head. A shadow slipped between the tents. Then, in the moonlight, he saw her, Kiona. She moved swiftly, barefoot, her dark hair catching silver light. She held something in her hands, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. You shouldn't be here, he whispered. She smiled faintly. You said that before. Kiona knelt beside the fence, unwrapping the bundle. Inside was a piece of dried meat, a flask of water, and something else, a small pendant carved from bone. This belonged to my mother, she said quietly. She wore it when she faced her own trial before the council. It's a symbol of truth. Royce stared at it, unsure what to say. Why give it to me? Because truth doesn't always belong to one side, she answered. Tomorrow, they will test your heart, not your strength. Remember that. He looked down at the pendant, the moonlight reflecting on its smooth surface. I don't know your ways, he said softly. I'll probably fail, whatever trial they have planned. Kiona shook her head. You've already passed one. You stayed when you could have run. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt fragile, sacred. Somewhere in the distance, an owl cried. Royce met her gaze. Why are you helping me, Kiona? She hesitated, then looked away. Because when you fought beside us, you didn't look like an enemy. You looked like someone trying to remember who he is. The words struck deeper than he expected. He swallowed hard, fighting the weight in his chest. Finally, she stood, pulling her shawl tight around her shoulders. When the sun rises, they'll bring you before the fire again. Don't speak for yourself. Let your actions speak. She turned to go, her figure fading into the pale moonlight. Kiona, he called softly. She stopped, half-turned, her eyes glinting in the dark. If I survive this, he said, I'll never forget what you've done tonight. Kiona gave a faint, almost sad smile. Then survive, she whispered. That will be enough. The desert wind picked up, carrying her scent and the sound of her steps, until both vanished into the night. Royce held the pendant tightly in his palm. It was warm, as if still carrying her heartbeat. The dawn broke cold and gray. The desert was quiet, too quiet, as if even the wind held its breath. In the center of the camp, the council had gathered again. The fire pit from last night still smoldered, sending thin trails of smoke into the pale sky. Royce stood barefoot in the dust, his wrists unbound now but still heavy with the weight of what was coming. The chief faced him, surrounded by elders and warriors. Kiona stood behind them, her eyes calm but filled with something deeper, fear maybe, or faith. Nishoba raised his staff. Royce Barrett, he began, voice deep and measured. You came to our land without permission. You built on our sacred ground. But you also fought beside us and saved what others tried to destroy. The council has chosen a path of trial, not blood. He struck the ground once with his staff, and the echo rolled through the circle. You will face 3 trials, the chief continued. If your spirit is true, the land will know it. If not, it will cast you out. Royce nodded slowly. His voice, when it came, was steady. What's the first? The trial of the earth. Ishoba said. You must return to the valley where your cabin stood, the ground you took. There, you will bury the ashes of what you built. You must find the sacred spring and bring back the stone that lies beneath it. Only then will we know if the spirits forgive you. A murmur rippled through the warriors. The sacred spring was a place no outsider had ever been allowed to see. Kiona stepped forward. You'll need a guide, she said. Yishoba's gaze hardened. He needs no help. The spirits will judge him alone. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing more. Royce looked toward the valley, a jagged horizon of rock and memory. The ruins of his cabin still smoked faintly in the distance. He took a deep breath, then turned back to the chief. When do I leave? Yishoba's eyes glinted in the morning light. Now. 2 warriors handed Royce a small clay urn filled with ashes, the remains of his home. He took it carefully, feeling its warmth still clinging to the surface. The air smelled of dust and cedar. As he stepped beyond the circle, the crowd parted in silence. No one spoke, no one moved. Only Kiona's eyes followed him, soft but steady, a silent promise that she believed in something greater than fear. Royce walked until the camp was just a shimmer behind him. The sun climbed higher, harsh and relentless. He moved through sand and stone, past charred wood and scorched earth, toward the valley where his past had burned away. When he reached the ruins, he stopped. The air was still thick with the scent of smoke. The place where he'd once lived now looked like a graveyard of memory. Blackened beams, melted iron, ashes drifting in the wind. He knelt, digging into the ground with his bare hands, and placed the urn gently into the soil. His voice was barely a whisper. I didn't know what this land meant, but I do now. The journey to the sacred spring took all day. By noon, the sun blazed mercilessly, turning the sand into fire beneath Royce's bare feet. His canteen was half empty, his lips cracked. The urn he had buried felt like a memory now, something heavy he had finally laid to rest. Ahead, the valley narrowed into a canyon. Shadows spilled down from the cliffs like ink, and the air grew cooler, quieter. Royce followed the faint path marked only by old stones and wine-carved symbols, signs left by hands centuries before him. The deeper he went, the more he felt the weight of the land pressing around him. It wasn't just silence, it was presence. Every gust of wind, every shifting grain of sand felt like something watching, waiting. By the time he reached the spring, the sun was low. and the canyon glowed gold and crimson. The water shimmered in a small basin of smooth rock impossibly clear, reflecting the dying light. He stopped awed. For a moment, he forgot why he had come. Then he saw it, a single flat stone at the bottom of the pool, carved with markings he didn't recognize. Royce knelt and dipped his hand into the water. It was cold, colder than it should have been. The chill ran up his arm like electricity. He reached deeper, but the stone seemed farther away than it looked. He leaned in, straining, until suddenly, his reflection shifted. It wasn't his face in the water anymore. It was his cabin, burning again. And behind it, the faces of the men he once rode with, the landowners who had tricked him into signing their papers. Their laughter echoed faintly through the canyon. Royce jerked his hand back, gasping. The vision faded. His pulse pounded in his ears. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to breathe. "This isn't real," he whispered. "It's the trial." When he looked again, the water was calm. He plunged his arm back in, ignoring the cold, the ache, the fear. His fingers brushed the stone. It was smooth, unnaturally so, like it had been shaped by more than water. As he lifted it, the surface shimmered faintly, and for an instant, the canyon seemed to sigh, a low, resonant hum that moved through the air and into his bones. The wind rose suddenly, carrying with it whispers, indistinct but urgent. He couldn't make out words, only emotion, grief, warning, forgiveness. He stood there, trembling, holding the stone against his chest. The whispers faded as quickly as they came. The desert fell silent again. Royce looked up at the sky, the first stars beginning to show through the fading light. He whispered, "If this is your land, then I walk it with respect." He turned to leave, but on the cliff above, a figure watched him. Fiona. She hadn't spoken, hadn't followed openly, but she had come anyway. The wind carried her voice faintly down the canyon. "Take it to my father," she called. "The spirits have seen you." Royce nodded. He felt the stone pulse faintly in his hand, as if alive. When Royce returned to the Apache camp, the night fires were already burning. The people stood in silence as he approached, dust-covered and exhausted, holding the sacred stone in his hands. The chief waited at the edge of the fire's circle, Fiona beside him, her expression unreadable. Royce knelt and placed the stone before Nishoba. "I found it," he said, voice hoarse but firm, "at the spring." The chief regarded it quietly, then looked at him. "And what did you see there?" Royce hesitated. "The truth," he said finally, "and the past I had to let go." A murmur rippled through the warriors. The chief nodded once, as if satisfied. "You have faced the earth," he said. "Now you will face the hunt." Royce frowned. "The hunt?" "The trial of courage," Nishoba continued. "Tomorrow, you will ride with our warriors into the northern reach. There, a mountain lion has begun hunting our herds. You will face it alone, kill it, or drive it away. The test will measure not your strength, but your heart." Royce nodded slowly. "When do we leave?" "Before sunrise," Nishoba said. "You will ride with my nephew, Taza. He will lead you to the hunting grounds." From the crowd, a tall, hard-eyed warrior stepped forward. His expression made it clear that he did not approve of this test, or of Royce's presence at all. Taza looked him up and down, then spat into the dirt. "If the spirits favor you, maybe they'll keep you from dying too quickly." Fiona shot Taza a sharp glance. "He doesn't need your mockery," she said. But Taza ignored her, turning and walking toward the horses. Nishoba raised his hand, ending the moment. "Rest now, both of you," he said to Royce and Fiona. "The dawn will decide what kind of man stands before us." The night stretched endlessly. Royce sat alone near a dying fire, sharpening the blade of his knife. Every sound in the darkness made him tense. The call of an owl, the whisper of the wind, the distant coyote's howl. He thought of the mountain lion, a creature of shadow and hunger, silent as the night itself. And for the first time since his trial began, he felt something that wasn't fear, but understanding. A figure approached quietly. It was Fiona. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly, a faint smile crossing his lips. She sat down beside him, wrapping her blanket around her shoulders. You said that before, she murmured. And yet, here I am again. They sat in silence for a long time, the flames painting her face in gold and amber. Finally, she spoke. The lion is not just a beast, she said. It's a spirit, a guardian of the mountains. You can't just kill it. You must make it understand you mean no harm. Royce looked at her, puzzled. And how am I supposed to tell that to a lion? Tiona smiled faintly. By surviving. He chuckled under his breath. You have a way of making things sound simple. Her eyes softened. It's not simple, but it's the only way. The first light of dawn spread across the desert, painting the sand in shades of gold and fire. Royce rode beside Taza through the cold morning wind. Neither man spoke. The only sounds were the rhythmic beats of the horses' hooves and the whisper of leather reins. They passed dry riverbeds, thorn bushes, and jagged rocks that cut the horizon like ancient scars. Royce could feel Taza's tension, not fear, but a sharp, restrained hostility. You don't trust me, Royce said finally. Taza's jaw tightened. Trust is earned, he said flatly. One trial doesn't make you one of us. Royce nodded. Then maybe this one will. Taza said nothing, but a faint smirk touched his lips. As the sun climbed higher, they reached the northern ridge, a place where the desert rose into sharp cliffs and narrow ravines. The air smelled of dust and cedar. Bones of cattle lay scattered among the rocks. Taza dismounted, crouching beside a set of paw prints in the dirt. He's close, he muttered. Big male, hungry. Royce knelt beside him, studying the tracks. We'll find him soon. Taza glanced at him, surprised by the calm in his voice. You've hunted before. Long ago, Royce replied, when I still thought every beast was my enemy. They followed the tracks into a narrow canyon. The air grew colder, the light dimmer. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from the shadows. The lion appeared, massive, golden, eyes burning like molten amber. Its muscles rippled beneath its fur as it stepped into the open, tail twitching. Taza raised his spear, but Royce held out a hand. Wait, he whispered. The lion's gaze fixed on him. It was not rage that Royce saw. It was pain, hunger, and the fierce will to live. Slowly, he lowered his rifle. Easy now, he murmured. I'm not here to steal your land. The beast growled louder, stepping closer. Taza shouted a warning, but Royce didn't move. Instead, he knelt, lowering his eyes, the gesture of respect. For a tense heartbeat, the canyon went silent. Then the lion stopped. Its growl faded into a deep rumble, and it turned, vanishing back into the shadows. Taza stared at Royce in disbelief. You let it go? Royce stood, brushing dust from his knees. No, he said quietly. It let me live. They began the long ride back to camp. Halfway through the canyon, a hawk appeared above them, circling once against the burning sky. Taza looked up. The sign, he whispered. The spirit saw you. Royce didn't answer. He only watched the bird disappear into the clouds, feeling something shift deep within him, not pride, but peace. When they returned to the village, the people gathered again around the central fire. Yishoba looked from Taza to Royce. Well, the chief asked. Taza stepped forward. He faced the lion, he said, and lived. But he didn't kill it. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Yishoba's expression was unreadable. The days after the hunt passed quietly, almost too quietly. Royce worked beside the Apache men, mending fences, helping the women carry water, sharing stories by the fire. For the first time since his exile began, he felt at peace. The people no longer looked at him with suspicion. Some even greeted him by name. Tiona smiled more now, her laughter soft and rare like rain in the desert. Sometimes, in the fading light, she would watch him from across the camp as he helped the children carve small wooden animals. In those moments, the distance between them seemed to vanish. But peace in the desert never lasts. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Taza rode into the village at full gallop, his horse lathered with sweat. He leapt down before the chief's tent. "Riders," he said breathlessly. "White men, soldiers or settlers, I can't tell. They're armed, headed this way." A murmur spread through the camp. Women clutched their children. Warriors reached for their weapons. Chief Nishoba stepped forward, his face grave. "How many?" Taza swallowed hard. "At least 20? The chief turned to the people. "Prepare the camp, hide the young. Call the council." Royce stood still, heart pounding. He knew what this meant. The same kind of men who had once ridden with him, men who saw land as property, not as life. Kiona approached him, voice low. "Will you fight them?" Royce hesitated. "If I do, I'll be killing men I once called my own." "Then don't fight for them," she said softly. "Fight for us." Those words struck him harder than any weapon. As darkness fell, the council gathered around the great fire. Flames danced on the faces of warriors, their eyes reflecting both fear and fury. Yeshoba's voice cut through the murmurs. "These riders come to take what is not theirs," he said. "We will not surrender our home. But the spirits demand more than strength. They demand unity." All eyes turned to Royce. The chief stepped closer, studying him in silence. "You have walked our trials, faced our earth, our beasts, and our hearts," Yeshoba said. "Now you will face the storm. If you wish to be one of us, you must defend us." Royce looked around the circle, at Taza, still bruised but nodding faintly, at Kiona, her eyes glimmering with pride and fear, at the children hiding behind their mothers. "I will stand with you," he said finally. A murmur of approval swept through the crowd. The chief lifted his staff toward the fire. "Then the spirits shall watch over us all," Nishoba declared. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low rolling, like the earth itself preparing for war. The warriors began to paint their faces with red and black clay, whispering prayers under their breath. Royce followed Kiona to the edge of camp, where the sky burned with lightning far away. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "don't forget what you've become here." He reached for her hand but stopped, afraid to break the fragile moment. "And what's that?" Her eyes met his. "One of us?" The storm broke with thunder and gunfire. From the ridge, Royce saw torches flickering like fireflies in the valley, riders advancing fast. The Apaches moved swiftly, blending into the rocks, their war cries rising into the night. Taza shouted orders while Chief Nishoba stood tall, unshaken. Royce gripped his revolver, heart pounding. When the first shot rang, he fired back without hesitation. Dust exploded. Horses screamed. Chaos erupted. Among the attackers, a familiar voice shouted his name. "Barrett, I knew you'd crawl back here." It was Calder, the land agent who had betrayed him years ago. He sat on horseback, grinning like a vulture. "You don't belong with them," Calder yelled. "Walk away, and I'll let you live." Royce rose from cover, firelight painting his face. "You already took my life once," he said. "This time, I'm taking it back." Gunfire cracked again. Royce hit one of Calder's men, then dove for cover as bullets shattered the stones. The Apaches pressed forward, arrows slicing the air. Thunder rolled across the desert, mingling with screams. Then Royce saw two riders break away, galloping straight toward the camp. Kiona stood there, protecting the children. Without thinking, Royce ran. He crashed through the smoke, jumped onto one of the riders, and pulled him from the saddle. The man swung a knife. Royce caught his wrist, turned, and slammed him down. The blade fell into the sand. The last of the gunfire faded. The attackers fled, leaving silence and smoke. As the storm drifted away, dawn began to bloom, soft and gold. Chief Nishoba approached, his face solemn but proud. "You fought not for blood," he said, "but for life. The spirits have seen you." Royce lowered his gun. "I didn't fight for the spirits," he said quietly. "I fought for her, for all of you." Kiona stepped closer, her eyes bright in the morning light. "You found where you belong," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "I just followed the hawk." Above them, a lone bird circled high, silent, endless, free. As the sun rose over the desert, the fire's last embers faded, and the land breathed again. Royce Barrett was no longer an outsider. He had become part of the story of the earth, the wind, and the people who called it home.